And I'm a math major who worked with the Howlett Lab over the summer. And the Howlett Lab studies restoration and community ecology. And you might be wondering, what is a math major doing in an ecology lab? Well, throughout this presentation, you'll see the ways that ecology and math overlap and how I'm using both disciplines to help further research on land usage and its effects on native and invasive species in the Great Basin. Cheatgrass is one of the most problematic issues for land managers. This invasive weed smothers native plant life needed for native animal habitats. And once that cheatgrass becomes dry, it then becomes a liable source of kindling to ignite and spread intense and wide-reaching wildfires, which in turn can then eradicate any native plant life species that is left. And this cycle of cheatgrass and fires is a high threat that can lead to collapse of an entire ecosystem. And so researchers and land managers have come up with lots of possible solutions to this problem. And while some of these tactics have been successful, cheatgrass still is remaining a daunting problem that requires multiple solutions tailored to varying environments and land use goals. So my current research in the field involves how land use affects cheatgrass invasion, specifically cattle grazing. My primary objective was to use satellite imaging to look at watering holes for cattle in eastern Oregon to find the radius of impact they have on the environment. Satellite imaging is then combined with GPS plot points collected from the field to create maps and graphs via some coding in a program called R, and showing these relationships and patterns between distance from watering holes and the cover type, uh, whether that be invasive, native, bare ground, or land with no vegetation. So then when cattle come to these watering holes, they're going to spend a lot of time there, right? And especially in these warm and arid environments. And during this time that they spend there, they're going to trample, they're going to eat the surrounding vegetation and clear a lot of the land. And this can be helpful if the vegetation surrounding the water is invasive to the environment, right? But with the disruption of all the soil, this is also allowing for a lot of movement of seeds. And for an invasive species like cheatgrass, who relies on creating tons of seeds and then having spread around, this is going to create a large surrounding breeding ground for that invasive species to dominate that environment. And this is going to lead to many important questions, like does cattle grazing help or hurt cheatgrass and native species abundance? And what effects does cattle grazing have on the area? And then how can we manage these effects for preservation and land utilization? So our first question, does cattle grazing help or hurt cheatgrass native species abundance, isn't actually the right question to be asking. The use of cattle grazing and its effect on cheatgrass is an intricate and complex study, and it depends on intensity, duration, frequency, the timing of use, and much more. And so grazing exists on a spectrum and requires balance in order to be useful rather than harmful. So it's like cooking chicken. If you cook chicken for too long, it's going to eventually burn. It's going to overwhelm all the other tastes and spices, and it's going to be inedible, right? But if you cook chicken for long enough, then you'll be left with the potential, or if you don't cook it for long enough, you're going to be left with the potential for salmonella and food poisoning. That's not good. So overgrazing leads to trampling of native species and plants and increases in bare ground, creating the perfect breeding ground for cheatgrass. And then no grazing leads to a large abundance of continuous fire fuels left to grow rampant without management of the grazing. So as you need balance and timing of cooking chicken, you're also going to need balance in grazing. So whether the questions we want to be asking are how can we utilize cattle grazing to be beneficial, and how do we avoid, or how do we need to avoid, what do we need to avoid in order to prevent cattle grazing becoming harmful? My research hopefully will help further study the correlations between distance from cattle watering holes and vegetation cover types, and finding these patterns can help land managers prevent the spread of invasive species like cheatgrass, limit the fire cheatgrass cycle, and help preserve native species in the area. Thank you.